what I was getting at with the importance of culture, right? Like you really do reach people and
Right.
affect people with it. And I think it's now like more important than ever. Like, Rogan the other day was saying how comedy is kind of the last stand, like the last bastion of freedom we have right now in culture, because now comedians are kind of like rebels again, right? With all these censorship things going on at all the big tech companies and all that, right? It's like stand-up comedy is a safe space to do that in culture.
It is, but I got to be honest, I don't think that's the last bastion. Because if you look at filmmaking, filmmaking in the past, even independent filmmaking, you still kind of needed the studio influence, right?
Right.
Nowadays, with the avenues that you have, you don't need the studio. You don't need 20 people saying, okay, well, this idea will work and you can do this and you can do that. If you look at uh, if you look at the most recent film, Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
If you look at that, for instance, that was a film that they had been pitching and pitching and pitching, and every studio was like, "We're not touching it." So they went out and they crowdsourced and they got the money to shoot it, and they put it out, even though nobody would put it out. They found a way to get it out there, and they got their message across, and then it became this huge, huge talking point, and it's moved the needle. Is it as easy as stand up? No, because you can get on stage and say whatever the hell you want. Doesn't mean everybody's going to see it. But if you're willing to put the work in and find an avenue, I think that any source of media is applicable. You just have to be willing, number one, to take the risk, and number two, to put the work in.
Totally agree. Right. I completely agree. And even on YouTube, right? You see these YouTube channels that are getting big politicians on to come speak. Like Vivek just went on Friday Night Tights the other week, right? And Benny Johnson is essentially like the new Fox News, right? Like there's so many different ways to do it. So I agree there. There are more outlets but that's like culture, the beauty of culture as a whole, right? Like it could be in many different places.
Yeah, I mean, even on that point too, like it's become a thing for a presidential candidate to do podcasts.
Yeah.
Because of the influence and reach that it has, right? The conversations that get to be had, and then the rawness and realness, where it's not like you throw it up on a media station and then it's edited down to whatever they want it to be, essentially, or cutting you off. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said with that. It's exactly what you're saying with artists. Like it's our expression, our story. That's the whole point of making films, is storytelling, right? What story do you have to tell, and do you have the courage to go do it? And it's not easy, no matter what scale you're on. But you find a way. If you really want something, you find a way. And that's honestly, I got to see your film Topper, man. And that's what I got to experience, man. You did something really special with that. And it invoked emotion in me the whole time. I felt something the entire time I was in it, dude. And I was like, my hat is off to you on that, man. I want to know more about that, how long it took you to develop it, to write it, to why you chose that story. Like what was it about that you wanted to tell that story?
Thanks. That means a lot. But before I get into that, one last point that I wanted to make when we were talking about, these forms of media, and specifically politicians coming onto these podcasts. What I love about podcasts and what I think is important about podcasts is, especially long form podcasts, is when you have a guest on, like a politician, right? And you do Rogan, it's 3.5 hours, right? You can't keep your charade up for that long.
Yeah.
Eventually the audience is going to see who you really are. You're going to slip up, because politicians are good at faking for, 3-minute press conferences or 5-minute press conferences or 15-minute sound bites. But in 3.5 hours, you're going to let slip who you really are. And I think it's what's important with podcasts. I think it's what's important with Rogan. I don't always agree with what Rogan has to say, and I don't think anybody should.
Right.
But when you get somebody on like Robert Kennedy Jr., and he gets on there and he's rah, I'm Mr. Freedom, I'm Mr. this, I'm Mr. that. You get him on for 3.5 hours and you start to go, oh, you are, to a point.
Yep.
But you're not everything that you're saying that you are. So I think those long form podcasts are important. I think it's important to really get an idea of who somebody is. Let all that bullshit fall away.
No teleprompter.
Yeah. Yeah. And Joe isn't afraid to ask questions, the big questions. I think that's important, because what I will say about Joe and his podcast is it's not an echo chamber. He asks questions from both sides.
Yeah.
He doesn't just want he's not giving you talking points.
Right.
I love that. I think that's important.
Yeah, it gets an objective view of any topic, right? You get to see both sides and make up your own decision.
Yeah. And don't, most of these interviews that you see these guys doing on TV, their handlers have given the interviewer a list of questions they're allowed to ask.
Yeah, look at Tucker Carlson, right?
Yeah.
Like he was really limited at Fox with what he could cover, and then he eventually got fired for it, and now he's doing hour-long segments like every other day on Twitter, right? And it's like he's been unleashed. He's like,
and he gets 20 times the views.
Oh, hundreds of millions. Yeah.
It's crazy.
So crazy.
Crazy. He's averaging like 1.5 million on Fox, and then he goes on Twitter. It's like
it's insane.
20 million.
Yeah.
It's bonkers.
Independent media though.
Yeah, and independent filmmaking.
Yeah.
Going back to Topper. Topper was a very important story to me because for two reasons. Number one, it's semi-autobiographical. A lot of the things in that film happened to me. So it was important for me to tell that story for anybody that's experienced that, such as yourself, somebody that's experienced abuse, experienced, doubting themselves, doubting their choices in lives, doubting who they are, doubting if they want to continue in life, those types of things. So that was important to me. And then also, like we were talking about before the podcast, as an actor, I've been in LA, in Hollywood, fighting to be an actor for 15 years. And I got to a point where I was just tired of begging for my supper. I was tired of doing these auditions and busting my ass and driving to Santa Monica during rush hour and sitting in traffic for 2 hours to get there. And you walk in and there's 200 dudes that look exactly like you for one role that has already been given to the casting director's cousin.
Right.
And you're like, what the fuck am I doing here?
Yeah.
I'm trying so hard and nobody's going to let me in because I don't know this producer or I'm not related to that director. So I got to a point where I was just like, you know what? Fuck this process. Fuck learning all these lines for a character that I don't care about, that has no development, that isn't interesting, and a script that's dog shit, so I can be in the next remake of this movie from 1984.
Right.
Like, what am I doing? Fuck this. I want to make cinema. I came to LA to make cinema, to make stories that people care about, characters that people care about. Because I remember movies growing up that did that for me and evoked emotion like in you when you watch the movie, because it's real. I didn't write Topper and I didn't put the team together to make Topper based on, is this going to sell well in China?
Right.
Yeah.
Is this gonna do well in the theaters? I wrote it because it was a story that was important to me and a character that had a real arc and a real draw. And it was real stories about people that I felt like people could connect with. And I shot it that way. And luckily it's done very well. Like, as far as connecting with people, it's kind of jump-started my career in the way that I wanted it to go.
Oh yeah.
My friend Paris, who's here, you guys can't see him. We connected through Topper, and he saw it and fell in love with it and fell in love with my vision as a filmmaker. And he's been my biggest cheerleader since. And through that, things have just, kind of snowballed. So, and Topper's been the vehicle for that so far. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to drop a like if you enjoyed the video.
And subscribe and hit the bell for a whole lot more to come.